I'm Jen, and I'll be leading us in our Tonglen Meditation tonight. Has anybody practiced Tonglen before? I know a couple of you have, but no. Is anybody new to the DVT? Welcome.
Oh, not to the temple.
Oh, okay.
It's interesting because I was reading the paper, and this type of meditation is something I've done intuitively. I didn't know there was an actual style to it. I thought I would just do it by myself.
Yeah.
So, super fascinating.
Cool. Yeah, good for you. So yeah, I'll just be leading this for a couple weeks on Wednesdays. And I'm just a practitioner here at the temple, like all of you. I'm not a teacher or an expert or anything. And so, yeah, Tonglen is it's a compassion meditation practice. So it's said to be a 1,000-year-old Tibetan practice based on laying the foundation for compassion in our meditation and then also just in our daily lives. And in Tibetan, the word Tong means giving and Len means receiving. And so this reflects the practice focus on receiving pain and giving out compassion. So we're really working on training the mind to transform our suffering, our own suffering, and then the suffering of those around us into compassion. So with this practice, we work kind of directly with our habitual tendencies to avoid suffering and attach ourselves to pleasure. And we learn to embrace all of our life experiences with more openness, compassion, and understanding rather than denial and aversion and resistance. So I'm going to read a little bit before we start the meditation from this Pema book. It's called Start Where You Are. Sounds like somebody's maybe familiar with it. Yeah. So I was looking for books on Tonglen, and I only found a couple, but I actually had this book like in my library already, and it talks about Tonglen. So there's some good stuff in here. So she says, we don't have to make such a big deal about ourselves, our enemies, our lovers, and the whole show. This emphasis on gentleness is the pith instruction on how to reconnect with openness and freshness in our lives, how to liberate ourselves from the small world of ego. We'll keep coming back to this sense of freshness and open space and not making such a big deal, because we are now about to get into the really messy stuff. In Buddhist teachings, the messy stuff is called klesha, which means poison. Bringing it all down to the simplest possible formula, there are 3 major poisons: passion, aggression, and ignorance. We can talk about these in different ways. For example, craving, aversion, and couldn't care less. Addictions of all kinds come under the category of craving, which is wanting, feeling that we have to have some kind of resolution. Aversion encompasses violence, rage, hatred, and negativity of all kinds, as well as garden variety irritation. And ignorance, nowadays, it's usually called denial. So the pith instruction on all the Buddhist teachings is whatever you do, don't try to make these unwanted feelings go away. That's an unusual thought. It's not our habitual tendency to let these feelings hang around. Our habitual tendency is definitely to try to make those things go away. People and situations in our lives are always triggering our passion, aggression, and ignorance. A good old innocent cup of coffee triggers some people's craving. It represents comfort and all the good things in life. If they can't get it, their life is a wreck. Other people have an elaborate storyline about why it's bad for you, and they have an aversion. Plenty of other people couldn't care less about a cup of coffee, and it doesn't mean much to them at all. And then there's good old Mortimer, that person who is sitting next to you in the meditation hall, or perhaps someone who works in your office. Some people are lusting when they see Mortimer. He looks wonderful to them. A lot of their discursive thought is taken up with what they'd like to do with Mortimer. A certain number of people hate him. They haven't even talked to him yet, but the minute they saw him, they felt loathing. Some of us haven't noticed him, and we may never notice him. In fact, a few years from now, he'll tell us he was there, and we'll be surprised. The three poisons are always trapping you in one way or another, imprisoning you and making your world really small. When you feel craving, you could be sitting on the edge of the Grand Canyon, but all you can see is this piece of chocolate cake that you're craving. With aversion, you're sitting on the edge of the Grand Canyon, and all you can hear is the angry words you said to someone 10 years ago. With ignorance, you're sitting on the edge of the Grand Canyon with a paper bag over your head. Each of these three poisons has the power to capture you so completely that you don't even perceive what's in front of you. Tonglen practice turns the conventional formula on its head in an unpredictable, non-habitual way. It points to how the three poisons can be three seeds of becoming a child of illusion, how to step out of this limited world of ego fixation, how to step out of the world of tunnel vision. Tonglen practice will give you a very explicit method for working with this kind of logic, or you could say big heart logic. There's nothing really wrong with passion or aggression or ignorance, except that we take it so personally and therefore waste all that juicy stuff. Whatever you do, don't try to make the poisons go away, because if you're trying to make them go away, you're losing your wealth along with your neurosis. All this messy stuff is your richness, but saying this once is not going to convince you. If nothing else, however, it could cause you to wonder about these teachings and begin to be curious whether they could possibly be true, which might inspire you to try them for yourself. So with that, we'll get into the meditation, and I'll just provide some instructions before we begin. And hello to everybody who walked in. I'm Jen. So this meditation happens in a few phases. And what we'll do is we'll start with grounding ourselves and just kind of settling into the meditation with stillness and openness of mind. And then we'll begin to visualize an energy of suffering and the relief of suffering. And so what that looks like is that we will imagine that we're breathing in a feeling of heat and darkness and heaviness, and breathing out a cool, bright light. So we'll do that for a little bit, and then we'll focus on a personal situation. We'll breathe in our own suffering, and we'll breathe out compassion for ourselves. And then we'll practice breathing in another person's suffering or an animal's suffering, and breathing out compassion for them. So we can do that part of the practice for someone that we care about, who we know is suffering. We can do it for a group of people. We can do it for an animal. And if that isn't feeling right in the moment, you can always just come back to focusing on yourself, and I'll remind you of that. And then the last step is we will expand our compassion to all those who suffer. And, you know, this meditation, sometimes it can feel a little bit intense. And so if it's not working for you at any time, you can just let it go and just focus on the breath instead. So I'll ring the bell 3 times as we begin, and then again at the end. So go ahead and sit in a way that feels awake yet relaxed. And if you'd like to close your eyes and just take a moment to settle in. Let's start by taking 3 deep breaths. Eventually becoming aware of the natural rhythm of the breath. Gently allowing your awareness to scan through your body, softening and releasing any areas of tension. Relax the shoulders, soften the hands, relax the belly. As thoughts arise, recognize them and come back to the present moment, returning attention to the breath. Breathing in, know you're breathing in. Breathing out, know you're breathing out. Breathing in, follow breath in. Breathing out, follow breath out. Now on your in-breath, begin to visualize a cloud of hot, dark, heavy smoke. And on your out-breath, imagine a cool, bright light. Breathing in completely, taking that cloud of hot, dark, heavy smoke into your whole body. Breathing in a sense of opening. We can even visualize our hearts opening. And breathing out from all the pores in the body. Exhaling cool, bright light. And just continue breathing in this way until your visualization is synchronized with your in and out breaths, giving the in breath and out breath equal time. Breathing in a cloud of hot, dark, heavy smoke. And breathing out cool, bright light. Now focusing on a personal situation, something that may be difficult for you. This can be any kind of suffering, from the big profound things to the everyday mundane things. And just imagine this situation in your mind. And on your inhale, breathe in the pain that you're experiencing. Imagining it as a cloud of hot, dark, heavy smoke that dissolves in your heart. And on your exhale, opening your heart to compassion, breathing out cool, bright light. Breathing in suffering and breathing out compassion. If it helps, you can put a hand over your heart to keep a steady intention there. Breathing in a cloud of hot, dark, heavy smoke. Letting it dissolve in your heart. And breathing out cool, bright light. And now focusing on someone who you know is in pain, or an animal or a group of people whom you wish to help. Imagine seeing them in your mind. And on your inhale, breathe in what's causing them distress. Imagining the distress as a cloud of hot, dark, heavy smoke that dissolves in your heart. And on your exhale, sending out relief in whatever form you wish. Something that produces well-being. Opening your heart to compassion. Breathing out cool, bright light. If you feel stuck here, you can shift the focus of the Tonglen to your own feelings. Doing the practice for the pain or resistance you yourself are feeling, and simultaneously for all those who feel the same kind of suffering. Breathing in the suffering and breathing out compassion. Breathing in a cloud of hot, dark, heavy smoke. Letting it dissolve in your heart and breathing out cool, bright light. And now we can start breathing in for all the people who are suffering in this way, or all the animals. And breathing out, sending relief to all of them. Instead of them being an obstacle, they become the basis for compassion for others who are in the same boat. Breathing in their pain, and breathing out compassion. Breathing in a cloud of hot, dark, heavy smoke, letting it dissolve in your heart, and breathing out cool, bright light. Now letting the Tonglen go, just returning to focusing on your breath. Following breath in and following breath out. And just feel your breath, feel your body sitting here. Once again, taking 3 deep breaths. Would anyone like to share how the meditation felt for them?
Extremely intense. Like more intense than when I've tried to do something similar on my own.
It reminded me of metta, loving kindness. It's just approached a little differently.
Yeah, the meditation, this type of meditation feels really intense for me too. And I actually kind of dislike it, so that's why I practice it. It's gotten easier over the past few years a little bit sometimes, but it is kind of intense, right? Like breathing in that hot cloud of smoke sometimes like brings up a lot.
So that's the first time I've done that, and I did find that it was challenging to ascribe such different qualities to the in-breath and the out-breath, which to me experientially seem quite similar. You know, the in-breath and the out-breath. One is so kind of negative and heavy and dark. You know, the heavy smoke, the hot, heavy smoke. And then it was easier for me on the out-breath, obviously. And maybe that's just because it's hard to take on suffering in general. But I was having a hard time ascribing the in-breath to this dark, heavy cloud. Maybe it would just be trying more, you know. But I also, it definitely reminded me of metta, which I know is more of a concentration practice. I don't know if this is also considered to be a concentration practice, or usually with metta I'm reciting some kind of, may I be happy, may I be peaceful, may I be free from inner and outer harm, or something, or they, or someone in particular, and it becomes this recitation in my mind as I'm reading. But this was very different, I thought, in a lot of ways, because of the difference between the in-breath and the out-breath.
Yeah, I think you've articulated the similarities and differences really well. Yeah, both really beautiful compassion practices.
I also noticed, similar to what you were saying, when we first started large, I felt the same thing he was feeling. It was very hard for me to differentiate. It felt very similar. When we honed in on an individual, and I focused on my mother, I could visualize her pain. I could visualize her suffering. I know exactly what that looks like for her, and I could paint a very vivid picture. And that's where the intensity came. When I was breathing in, I had specific examples of what that pain looked like. And I felt it in my eyes, I felt it in my throat, extreme intensity. And as I released it, that's where I started noticing the difference. When I focused on myself, less so, because I feel like her suffering is so much more intense. So I did experience both sides of that. I think finding something that you can visualize or something that's connected to you brought the intensity.
Yeah, I like to think about the parallels with just like everyday life and how we push away suffering. And one of the things I was thinking about while we were meditating is my dog, Meatball. And she's just a little little white angel. She's like a miracle. And she's my little sidekick, you know, and she's, I think, actually probably like 9 years old. But I tell everyone that she's 3. You know, people ask us at the park, how old's your dog? And I'm like, 3, maybe 4. And I have this, like, very strong aversion to her aging. And, you know, so when, like, my partner points out, like, oh, you know, Meatball she's not running at the park like she was just a couple of years ago, right? Or she's sleeping a lot more. Like, it's so heartbreaking for me to imagine that she's aging, that I just refuse to believe it. But what I notice that actually does is, like, it creates, like, some distance between me and a Meatball, you know? Like, I love her the same way, but it's like, it's different, right? When I have that barrier in place versus just like opening up to the fact that she is aging and she is going to die. It's like really finding like that softness and letting the pain be there, that actually alleviates the suffering more than like denying the fact that she is aging. So I want to read a little bit more from this Pema book. I think there might be a part in here about the soft heart. So all Dharma agrees at one point. All the teachings and all the practices are about just one thing. If the way that we protect ourselves is strong, then suffering is really strong too. If the ego or the cocoon starts getting lighter, then suffering is lighter as well. Ego is like a really fat dog trying to get through a very narrow door. If there's a lot of ego, then we're always getting squeezed and poked and irritated by everything that comes along. When something comes along that doesn't squeeze and poke and irritate us, we grasp it for dear life and want it to last forever. Then we suffer more as a result of holding on to ourselves. One might think that we're talking about ego as enemy, but this is a very different approach, a much softer approach. There's the original soft spot. The messy stuff that we see in ourselves and that we perceive in the world as violence and cruelty and fear is not the result of some basic badness, but of the fact that we have such a tender, vulnerable, warm heart of bodhicitta, which we instinctively protect so that nothing will touch it. This is a life-affirming view. It starts from the point of basic goodness or basic good heart. The problem is that we continually grab the wrong end of the stick. All practice agrees that there's some fundamental pattern that we have, which we're always trying to avoid the unpleasantness and grasp the pleasantness. There seems to be a need to change the fundamental pattern, always protecting against anything touching our soft spot. Tonglen practice is about changing the basic pattern. So earlier I referred to an ego earlier in this chapter, I referred to an ego as being a room where you just try to get everything on your own terms. To get out of that room, you don't drive up in a big machine and smash the whole thing to pieces. Rather, at your own speed, starting where you are, you begin to open the door and the windows. It's a very gentle approach, one that acknowledges that you can gradually begin to open that door. You can also shut it as often as you need to, not with the desire to stay comfortable, but with the intention ultimately to gather more courage, more sense of humor, more basic curiosity about how to open that door, until you just leave it open and invite all sentient beings in as your guests, until you feel at home with no agenda and with groundlessness. The main thing about this practice, all dharmas agree at one point, is that you're the only one who knows what is opening and what is closing down. You're the only one who knows. You're the only one who knows when you're using things to protect yourself and keep your ego together, and when you're opening and letting things fall apart, letting the world come as it is, working with it rather than struggling against it. You're the only one who knows. There's a saying that says, don't make gods into demons. What it means is that you can take something good, like Tonglen practice, and turn it into a demon. You can just use anything to close your windows and doors. You could do Tonglen, as one of my students once described to me. He said, I do it, but I'm very careful about the control button. I breathe in just enough so that it doesn't really hurt or penetrate, and I breathe out just enough to convince myself, that I'm doing the practice. But basically, nothing ever changes. He was using Tonglen just to smooth everything out and feel good. You can also use Tonglen to feel like a hero. You're just breathing in and breathing out all over the place, but your motivation isn't to befriend and begin to penetrate those areas of yourself that you fear or reject. In fact, you hope the practice will just bolster your sense of confidence, bolster your sense of being in the right place at the right time, having chosen the right practice. And I'm on the side of the good, and all's right with the world. That doesn't help much. Maybe you've noticed that sometimes you feel like you're in a battle with reality, and reality is always winning. All the teachings, particularly Tonglen, are encouraging us, if we find ourselves struggling, to let that be a moment where we pause and wonder and begin to breathe in, trying to feel what's underneath the struggle. If we find ourselves complaining, it isn't that we have to say, oh, I'm bad because I'm struggling. It's not that it's a sin to complain. We're simply saying that the way to change the pattern is to begin to breathe in and connect with the heart, the soft spot that's under all that protecting. When you begin to touch your heart or let your heart be touched, you begin to discover that it's bottomless, that it doesn't have any resolution, that this heart is huge, huge, vast, and limitless. You begin to discover how much warmth and gentleness is there, as well as how much space. Your world seems less solid, more roomy and spacious. The burden lightens. In the beginning, it might feel like sadness or a shaky feeling accompanied by a lot of fear, but your willingness to feel that fear, to make fear your companion, is growing. After a while, this same feeling begins to turn into a longing to raise all the walls, a longing to be fully human and to live in your world without always having to shut down and close off when certain things come along. It begins to turn into a longing to be there for friends when they're in trouble, to be of real help to this poor, aching planet. Curiously enough, along with this longing and this sadness and this tenderness, there's an immense sense of well-being, unconditional well-being, which doesn't have anything to do with pleasant or unpleasant, good or bad, hope or fear, disgrace or fame. It's something that simply comes to you when you feel that you can keep your heart open. What comes up for you? You hear about touching that soft spot and staying open.
See a lot of resistance, because on the other side of that is vulnerability. And with vulnerability comes the opportunity for a lot of negativity and pain. So for me, it's like a wall that I approach, and I get closer and closer to.
What are some ways that we can practice, keeping our heart open during challenges or suffering, or even just like if somebody makes our coffee the wrong way?
Say forgiveness. Specifically what you said about the coffee the wrong way. Smile and drink it.
So something I've been trying to do is offer Tonglen on the spot, because you don't have to do it in a formal meditation setting. Like we can just do this on the spot. If we're in line at the grocery store and we see like a mom with her kid like freaking out, right? We can like offer them, do the Tonglen practice for them in the moment. So I've been trying to do it for people who annoy me. Like, I was with this group a few months ago, and there were some new people in the group, and there was, how there's just like sometimes somebody there that you're annoyed with and you don't really know why, right? But it's just like there's something, and he was like using these big SAT words, and I was like, man, what a smarty pants, like just feeling this like visceral reaction to him. And I couldn't even focus on like what this group was supposed to be doing, because I was just like, I'm so annoyed with this guy. And I don't know why. He's like using these big words. He's trying to be smarter than everybody and And I even like went home and told my family about it. And I told my, like telling people there's this annoying guy in that group. And I don't know if I want to go back, and then so I was doing a Tonglen meditation like a few days after I was in that group, and I was like, maybe I can offer this guy some compassion. Like I don't know what's beneath it with me, like why I'm so annoyed with him, but maybe if I can like soften to him a little bit and open myself up to him just a little bit, like I will feel less annoyed. And I did that a few different times during the Tonglen practice, and I did sort of like chill out with the guy, right? And I was able to like befriend him even. So yeah, that's one example of like how I think we can put this into practice in our lives.
But in that situation, you are the person who's suffering, right?
I am, but it's like, yeah, so of course, like, you always start by having compassion for yourself, right, in that situation. Like, start with yourself. Start with offering yourself compassion. Then have compassion for the other person, right?
I'm telling this because I started doing the same thing the past week.
Yeah.
And then in this situation, the question is like, who's suffering? And it's always like, I'm suffering. The other person is the other person. That's my reaction.
Yeah. Anything else anybody wants to share? Yeah.
I think for me the danger of the practice is that I can use it to blunt the suffering. If I don't really open my heart, then the light is almost a way to minimize the suffering. So when I do it, I have to be careful that I'm really letting it sink in. And I can feel it, if somebody's really suffering and I don't feel it deeply, then I know I'm kind of papering over the suffering. Do you have any advice about how to deepen that?
I think it just comes down to practicing, right? But it's also like I'm not an expert in this Tonglen meditation, but just from my own practice, I notice that sometimes I feel that way too. But I feel that sometimes I just cannot open my heart to a certain degree. And I think that there's like just some wisdom in that too, because sometimes we can't be just like fully open, right? So we have to like practice self-efficacy. And there have been times where like I've started the Tonglen practice, I had to just drop it completely because I didn't really feel like I was in the right space to do it. So I think it's just knowing like where you are and what you're capable of in that moment. It does feel kind of like radical almost, right? Because it's like so contrary to like what we want to do.
Yeah. You know, something I've tried is I watch YouTube videos that really touch me. My partner laughs. He even looks and says, "Oh, you're getting tearful." And it's almost like it helps me feel more. And then when I practice, it feels easier.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. Like there's a kind of a closing off that happens and you're working on like opening that up.
Yeah.
Yeah. I experience that too. Yeah. That's when I think about my dog dying.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, like if I think about that, it's just like I can feel that sense of opening.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you everybody for sharing this space with me tonight. Yes, do you have a question in the back?
No.
No? Okay. Thanks for sharing this space, and we'll do a transfer of merit, and then the host has some announcements. So please join palms. May the benefit of this practice be shared with all beings in all directions. May all be at peace. May all be free from suffering. Thank you.
Hey, good evening, everyone. My name is David. I'm your host for today.